So, Hare Krishna. Today we thought we would talk about protection. Protection is one of the essential traits that women need to experience in life. Maybe trait isn't the right word, but it's an essential experience that is very important for women. And for me, if to feel protected, I need to feel a sense of being loved and cherished. That's when I feel protected. So there was a conversation one time where Srila Prabhupada said, sometimes we are asked, it seems like you keep your women as slaves. And Srila Prabhupada, he was speaking in a class and he said, actually, that is not at all true. He said, women are very, very respected at home. He said, sons, they give the highest respect to their mothers, and the husband always gives the topmost protection to the wife. So I think we need to dissect what protection actually means. What does it mean for you?
So maybe we can try break that down into what are the different elements of protection that men can offer to women and especially to their wives. And the first one is probably pretty obvious, but it's supplying the material needs of life: food, shelter, clothing. And so that's a very obvious form of protection. Second would be to prevent your wife or your daughters or your granddaughters from being exploited. So we want to make sure they're protected in different ways. Like, I don't think there's probably any city in the world in our current day and age where a man would want his wife, daughter, or grandchildren walking out alone late at night, because you always have this feeling you want to make sure they're protected. So men also want to offer that kind of sense of security and protection. So it's a little deeper than that. It's not just that we want to be like a security guard or Amazon Prime mail order service that we're supplying the needs for our spouses and our daughters and our granddaughters. But there's other elements of protection which are also essential to make as women, as Uttama was saying, that women, they don't just want to feel they have a security guard and a mail order service, but they want to have that sense of feeling loved and protected. So there's other elements we need to examine to understand how to give them that sense of security.
I also see that women actually need protection from selfishness, because it's probably easy for any living entity to have that sense of selfishness. But I think that for women, because we tend to be a little bit more fearful, we tend to do that self-protection thing. And so we can get pretty self-absorbed. And like I was explaining in another class, that's why often it's advised that women be submissive, because we have a tendency not to be, because we're quite selfish. Everybody needs to be submissive to Krishna, but we kind of push hard in the other direction. And I think it's a pretty common phenomena that once you've been married and have kids, that sense of selfishness very much diminishes, because you just get more practiced at giving to others and having to give up your self-absorbed mindset. So having the protection of a man who, helps you grow in Krishna consciousness is really, really important for most ladies. Granted, some can feel that protection from Krishna and become so absorbed in Krishna that their selfishness, diminishes. their feeling of protection is always there, even materially. So it can be, that feeling of protection can be obtained just through the process of Krishna consciousness. But until we get there, it's a really good foundation for our spiritual progress to feel that sense of protection, either from the management structure, from our father, from our husband. It's a very secure feeling. And in that state of protection, we can learn how to be happy according to our own nature. We are able to live according to our God-given propensities and utilize them in the service of the Lord. And that can make us, any person, very satisfied. So that's part of the overall plan of Varnashram, that everyone has their place, their protection, their contribution. And in that way, we can advance nicely in devotional service. Because in order to access our higher intelligence, every living being needs to feel safe and protected. It's the bottom line when kids are freaking out. It's the same for women.
I think that's a very important point Uttama just mentioned, how if a woman is in that kind of stable, protected situation, it enables her to find her real nature and find her real self and engage according to her propensity. And as she's saying that, how ultimately that's the whole purpose of Varnashram, is to situate people in that kind of situation. Because if you're not settled in yourself, if you feel unprotected or exploited, it's very going to be very difficult to actually access your emotions and your inner feelings and be able to really understand the nature of your own self and your own God-given propensities. And so that's one advantage of having a society which very much values that kind of atmosphere of protection and emotional support, because one can find their own sense of self-worth and flourish. And when they also understand their own self-worth, that helps them to see the self-worth of others, including their children, their spouses, their community members. And that helps them also to help nurture the positive growth of others in society. So that's a very, very important point. And so again, a spiritual foundation is very important for that, because ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada said once, in life you can have so many zeros, but the sum total of an infinite number of zeros is still zeros. So even if you have the Amazon Prime and bodyguard and even someone's maybe looking after you emotionally, but not spiritually, the soul actually won't be satisfied. So the spiritual foundation is extremely important part of that protection. So especially as men, that's one of the supports we can offer to our families, is to ensure that we can arrange a spot in our house where there's a nice altar where deities can be worshipped, and we provide facility and resources so there can be, if you have deities, they can have clothes and flowers according to your means. But that's actually a very tangible way that we as men can offer this kind of spiritual support to our spouses by facilitating, enabling the worship of deities, which generally women do in the household. Sometimes also men do some deity worship. We actually have Gornitai deities in our house, and Uttama addresses them every day. And I also have some shalagrams that I worship every day. So for us,
we do it together. It's like a part of our spiritual connection ritual.
Yeah, and it is something that's very grounding and very important in terms of that protection.
I also see that in the scriptures, it's enjoined that men must protect women because that is a big part of their psychology. You want to talk about that?
I just want to talk about one aspect of protection that's very important. And also it's one, if you had all the other, I don't know, they say it in English, if all the other ducks were in the row and you didn't have this last duck, it would also, something would be missing. And that's very important that women have a sense of emotional connection with their spouse. And so one form of protection the man also has to offer is this protection from isolation. Mm. And often inadvertently, men, either because of their cultural upbringing or because of different kinds of unresolved issues in the relationships, sometimes men will become a little distant emotionally from their wives. They'll stop talking to their wives, stop exchanging meaningful conversation. And for women, psychologically, that emotional connection is extremely important.
Otherwise, we feel really isolated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so when women become isolated, it's very, very painful for them. And there's a very common dynamic that happens in marriage that women sometimes feel this emotional isolation from their husbands, and they'll start to complain that, well, why do you never talk to me? And unfortunately, that's not a very productive way to get a man to understand what needs you have and how they need to be met. Because for men, having the sense that they're protecting their wives and fulfilling their needs makes them feel successful in their life. It makes them feel valuable because they're adding value to the lives of their mothers and daughters and granddaughters. But whenever a man sees that his wife is dissatisfied with him, that tends to be very painful for men, because as I was saying, for women, the greatest fear is the fear of isolation, and that's why women need to be protected. And for men, generally, the biggest fear is the fear of inadequacy. So if a man sees his wife as dissatisfied with him, that's going to make him feel very inadequate at meeting those needs. And so when he hears that as a complaint, that makes him feel inadequate. And although it's a request in the unproductive guise of a complaint, it's very hard for men to receive. And generally what they will do is some men will become angry when they hear a complaint. And generally most men will simply withdraw, which makes it even more painful for the woman because she's trying to connect emotionally and he disconnects because of that exchange. And that's extremely counterproductive to the protection of women and the health of marriages. So one very essential thing for this element of protection to flourish is that women also need to see how they can help their husbands
do their
job. Give them the things that they need.
So we see that when Shastra advises men to protect women, it's a win-win. I win, I get my needs met. He wins. He fulfills his, psychological sense of duty. So it's a win-win. And as women, we don't want to sabotage this win-win, or because I think that our husbands naturally have that inherent sense of wanting to protect us, wanting to be compassionate. Maybe circumstances in life have covered it over, but it's there. It's there inherent in every living entity. So the problem is, as my husband was saying, he's not going to want to reach out and protect us if he feels unappreciated, or like every time he tries, he's just not good at it. We complain, or it's always wrong, whatever he does. So we have to understand that we also have to fan that spark in him and not squish it so that he doesn't feel afraid to offer the protection, that we're just going to jump on him. So, as my husband was saying, it's really hard on men when they feel criticized. And the problem with criticism is it tends to be character defamation. You always do this. Men never understand. It's like generalizations, or, you're such a negative person. Okay, what do you say to that? It's just like, go off in my man cave and leave her alone. So I think we have to be very careful not to trigger a man's sense of inadequacy and make him feel like the failure, so that he gives up his natural propensity to protect us. The reason that we do it is because we feel fearful of something. We're not getting our needs met. So we've been triggered to feel isolated or fearful. But that just means that, you know what? He's probably feeling the same thing. In a close relationship, if I'm upset, he's probably feeling upset. It's just that the reason that I'm upset is because I'm feeling fearful and unprotected and isolated. He's feeling it for a different reason. Same feeling, but he's feeling it as a sense of inadequacy or shame that he can't do what he's supposed to do. So whenever we're kind of responding in the mode of ignorance and passion from our sense of fear, it's very counterproductive because it triggers their sense of inadequacy. So we need to help men give us what we need by reciprocating and understanding that they're also in pain. If we're in pain, they're in pain. And we always want to reach out and help the other person. So that's bhakti. It's a reciprocation of service. Men are serving women in one way, we're serving men in another way. And that reciprocation is what makes, the happy life. So we very much need to understand that men do want to protect us, and fan it and help them to do it.
It's important to understand that, as Uttama was saying, the protection manifests as a sense of feeling loved and cherished. And sometimes we have a real misunderstanding of what love is. We think love is just a feeling. Like especially in the beginning of a marriage, they call it the honeymoon stage, where your body is flooded with all kinds of feel-good hormones. And people think, well, that's love. And it's just automatic, and life is a breeze, and everything's rosy, and it feels like you're walking on the moon. But that's a temporary stage, and eventually those hormonal influences subside, and you're left with who you really are, two unique individuals with differences. And so in marriage, we actually have to understand what is the real meaning of love, and what is the real meaning of love in terms of a Vaishnava context. Prabhupada was once describing that we love this body, not just because it's a bag full of bones and blood and organs, but we love this body and care for it because of the presence of the soul. And he said, why do we care for the soul? We care for the soul because it's connected to Krishna. And he said, why do we care for others, our spouses, our family, our community? He said, in the same way, because of the presence of the soul, and because the soul is connected to Krishna. And he said, in this way, that love goes to Krishna. So in terms of a Vaishnava understanding, our relationship of love with Krishna is very much integral and dependent upon how we relate to all Krishna's parts and parcels, which includes those parts and parcels who are very close to us, our spouses and our family members. And that's extremely important. We see that love actually means to see that our spouse is a very dear servant of Krishna. And the feeling of love, it's not just a feeling, but love is a manifestation of mutual service and compassion and respect. And when we have that sense of mutual service, compassion, and respect, that evokes this feeling of love and care and being cherished. So that feeling of love comes from these actions. And again, it's not just the action of providing necessities and being a bodyguard, but it's the action of doing those things with actual concern and care and love. That's what the real manifestation of love is, that sense of loving, caring, concern. So that's actually bhakti. So what we're looking for is not just happy marriages, but we're looking for Vaishnava marriages that are filled with loving bhakti. And to do that, we really need to understand how we can serve each other and understand what each other's needs are. And sometimes we don't really understand what each other's needs are for love and protection. Like generally men do not understand the importance of this emotional connection. And it's a simple thing. If you can understand that, you can go a long way towards making your wife feel loved and cherished. So again, to summarize protection, it's not just, it's not control. Sometimes people think protection is control. I have something valuable, I'm going to lock it up and just control it and manipulate it. That is not Vaishnava loving protection. So loving protection is really about understanding the essential needs of each other, especially of women, in terms of their spiritual natures, and also fulfilling their material needs to help them cultivate their spiritual natures and take the responsibility in our life to see that those needs are met as an offering of love and service.
So we'll end here. And if anyone has any questions, we can take them now.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful class and wonderful analysis of the word protection and its meaning in the Vaishnava context. We have a comment about, you remember the story of Chayavana Muni, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He had a young wife, a daughter of a king, who actually, I think, was it she who served him and helped him to bring out his best qualities, right, with time, thanks to her love. So was it she who gave him protection, or was it he who gave her protection?
Sometimes through the Prabhupada is described that the protection is actually mutual. So we do have to protect each other. It's just when the scriptures describe that, men must protect, they're understanding their psychological nature that has to be utilized in the right way. So just like it says that women are submissive, that's because that's what we need to hear. Men need to protect, that's what they need to hear. But as you say, protection is, very much mutual. And that protection comes, like my husband was explaining, by that reciprocation of love and service. So Chayavana Muni was pretty old dude. And, because Sukanya made an offense by poking his eyes. He was like in a little wormhole doing his meditation, and she poked a straw down there and she poked him. And she was feeling pretty repentant. And so when her father understood that Chayavana Muni was a bit attracted to his daughter, she agreed to marry him, partly just to atone for her offense to a great sage. And she did it with such wonderful service that, like you said, he just wanted to reciprocate with her. And, being old, he was probably, pretty grouchy and hard to live with because, when you're old, you're set in your ways and you got pain and everything hurts. So, but she just, took it in stride and did her service. And so he very nicely reciprocated by, asking the Ashwini Kumaras for a blessing to get a young, lively body so he could properly reciprocate with his wife. So that's the reciprocation between the two of them. Krishnandini and I actually did a bit of a lecture on that with the question and answer. So it's posted somewhere online if you want to hear more about that.
Yeah, we will definitely check it out. Thank you. And maybe you could just give us a link or something.
Sure thing, yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. And can we talk a little bit more about the difference between protection and control? And we are talking about control in a more negative way, right? This is what we are all afraid of, right? When somebody takes away my freedom, my, I don't know, rights or something. So how do we tell one from another? Because it is easy to mistake one for another, right? Very blurry sometimes.
I mean, there may be, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, how the modes of material nature are competing for supremacy. We're trying to move towards the mode of goodness, and the mode of goodness and pure goodness is this unalloyed bhakti, mutual service. But because we're still tinged with the modes of material nature, sometimes there may be a little influx of passion, ignorance, and maybe we might become a little controlling with each other. But because we're aspiring bhaktas,
and bhaktins, I could be controlling too.
we'll maybe catch ourselves and apologize and try to do it better. But if that kind of behavior becomes habitual, that becomes problematic, because when we become overly controlling, then the other person, then our spouse who's being controlled, they can lose their sense of individuality. They can lose their sense of freedom, their sense of creativity, because they're always expecting to be controlled. And sometimes they'll even become fearful that if I do or say the wrong thing, this controlling mood is going to be thrown upon me. So excessive control
doesn't make you feel protected, makes you feel scared.
And it can actually be a form of emotional abuse, which is very, very detrimental to individuals.
I'll do the 2 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And we have one more question. Uttama Prabhu, you were talking about that need, that we need to not to be isolated, and then and the man needs not to feel adequate, right? So when we deal with these feelings, aren't they an obstacle on our path of bhakti, in spiritual life? This is how our everyday life, it definitely affects our spiritual practices, right? So, and if we work on that, won't it just be a boost to our spiritual life?
For sure, because a big part of spiritual life is compassion. So when we are experiencing either those, like I said, those fearful situations, we need to be compassionate and reach out and see what's the other person experiencing. And that helps us to overcome that selfishness. It helps us to be able to see things from another perspective. And a big part of bhakti is being compassionate to the sufferings of others. Ultimately, not just on the material platform, but on the spiritual platform. So it's important to treat our family members like Vaishnavas. And that's how we're going to make spiritual advancement, by behaving like a Vaishnava and by treating the other as a Vaishnava. That's how we're really going to make spiritual advancement. because we have to walk the talk. And Krishna's putting us in these unique circumstances to force us to walk the talk. Otherwise, we're not going to be happy.
Yeah, thank you. And what I really liked how you said that what we are told by scriptures is what we lack, right? They say men should protect to encourage them to protect, and women should be submissive to encourage women to be submissive. Yeah, that's, like, that gives a whole background to it, like it's quality you need to develop, because you lack it.
And we need to always read scriptures on what is it that I'm supposed to learn, not you're supposed to protect me or you're supposed to be submissive. It's not to judge the other person.
Yeah, but to get yourself better answer, sorry.
That's right. I was just going to say, when there is that proper understanding and mood of protection in this loving, compassionate way, the submission will automatically be there. It's the automatic reciprocation. And Prabhupada once described that. He said, if the husband thinks the wife is his servant, he said, that's not very good. And if the wife doesn't want to serve the husband, that's not very good either. But he said, if the husband gives the wife all protection, in the way we're talking, then automatically she's going to want to reciprocate in a loving way. And Prabhupada said that is the ideal of Vedic household life.
It's reciprocation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I'm so much inspired by your definition of protection, which I can quote is feeling loved and cherished. And it is not only towards women, or a wife, but also a wife should make her husband feel loved and cherished, right? Mm-hmm. And also probably I could add adequate, right? Mm-hmm. And the husband,
relative. He wants to be more than just adequate, but
yeah. Thank you for this inspiring, meditation on this term of protection. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.